YouTube, Sandre here. This is going to be another one of these responses on the fly, responding to Computing Forever, because, I don't know, the guy just keeps making erroneous videos on this topic, I guess. This is the third time I respond to him, actually. But anyway, let's begin.
It feels like there's barely a day that goes by that the Irish mainstream media don't publish something about man-made climate change. We're now being bombarded endlessly by coverage that can only be described as alarmist, to say the least. Look at this article from the Irish Times. Can Ireland survive impacts of chaotic climate change? Weather expert Gerald Fleming flags examples that may derail state before 2050. And we have this artist's impression of Dublin City, specifically O'Connell Bridge and O'Connell Street, underwater. And there's buses and cars trying to navigate this massive flood. I mean, this is just ridiculously over the top. And we have images of parts of Galway and then one of Cork underwater, and we're supposed to take this seriously.
I don't know if you have the memory of a goldfish, but you really don't remember that you've had similar floods in Britain very recently. In fact, you've had quite a lot of these floods in Britain. Entire towns being submerged underwater. It's happened a lot of times actually lately in Britain due to very heavy rainfall, which, by the way, is one of the weather patterns that is predicted with our current climate models. But, yeah.
Now just look at this post on RT's Twitter account from the 11th of November. One of their posts has this image which could be of a family with no father, so a mother, a teenage son, and a teenage daughter. Or maybe they're not related and they're just a bunch of random strangers. Who knows? Either way, it's an older woman, a teenage boy, and a teenage girl, and they're in this dinghy. The girl is standing up and she's proudly holding the Irish flag with this look of defiance on her face, while a section of a Dublin suburb is submerged underwater. Is this supposed to be something that we actually take seriously? This is...
Again, just look at this footage, you know? I mean, these things happen, especially in Britain. In Ireland, too. So yeah, I don't know why you're, I really don't know why you're just brushing this off. I mean, floodings do happen in the British Isles. They're quite common. And there have been quite a lot of severe ones lately. So, I think it's perfectly understandable that the government is, you know, trying to prepare for this. I think it's very responsible, actually, of the media to highlight this problem to the public. But yeah, I really don't see why you're offended by this. Now, will this happen to all towns in Ireland or in Britain and whatever? Of course not. The vast majority of cities and towns in the British Isles are not going to be flooded anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that you still don't have a lot of towns and cities that will be flooded. You know, even towns like London is going to experience flooding. Maybe not as severe as many other countryside towns, but it is going to happen. You know, don't fool yourself into thinking that it's not going to happen to London or Dublin or whatever.
It's just so embarrassing that this was posted by the national public broadcaster that's partially funded by the Irish taxpayer through a TV license. Now I managed to catch...
If you are so confident that all of this is just a bunch of fucking baloney, then I suggest you stand by those words and you take no precautions whatsoever yourself to be prepared for a flood whatsoever. And I suggest that you advocate that we shouldn't pay any fucking tax money whatsoever for any emergency service to be specially trained to deal with a flood situation.
A few minutes of RT's climate change propaganda documentary, Will Ireland Survive 2050, which aired the other night. Now, I can't find the specific clip that I wanted to talk about because the documentary doesn't appear to be on the RTE player right now, but it is talked about in this article from the Irish Times in the following paragraph. The human consequences keep resurfacing. The carbon implications of our population rising by 2 million over the next 30 years. The likelihood that Ireland will become increasingly attractive to migrants displaced by climate catastrophe or sea level rise. That we become a lifeboat nation, as environmentalist Tara Shine describes it. So here we go again with another contrived excuse to justify mass immigration into Ireland.
It's not an excuse, dumbass. It's happening. Okay, think about it, okay? If climate change is true, I know you're contesting this, but just humor me here. If climate change is true, you're going to have, you know, extreme weather, okay? Places that are wet are going to get wetter. Places that are dry are going to get drier, okay? And basically what's going to happen is some areas where people have been able to survive, you know, are going to become pretty much impossible to survive in, at least in large numbers. Where are these people supposed to go? They have to go somewhere, you know, where it's actually habitable. And even though climate change is gonna, badly affect Europe, Europe is still gonna be, very much habitable and still a good place to live, even with climate change. Okay, it's still gonna be a habitable area. So of course, people, who are climate refugees, or perhaps you would prefer the term, environmental disaster refugees, they have to go somewhere. Well, Ireland is one of those nations where they could go to. So if you really care about immigration and you don't want too much of it, which, by the way, I agree with, I myself don't think that too much immigration at once is a good thing. Okay, you have to be very sensible about how many people you actually let into the country at any point. Too many, and you're not going to be able to integrate them all, and that's only going to lead to a bunch of social problems, as well as a huge economic cost, as well as the depletion of your own internal workforce, and wages dropping and whatever. So look, I agree with you that immigration is a serious issue. Okay, you need to have sensible immigration laws, and you need to have sensible amounts of immigrants that you actually let in at any time, not too many at once. I actually agree with you on that one. However, you have to realize that due to climate change, you will see an increase in refugees. This time, however, because of climate change, many of these refugees are not going to be able to return to their country. This is not like some war situation where, once the war is over, these people can return to their home nation. No. These are essentially, from a human lifetime perspective, permanent changes. So a lot of these refugees, they're not going to be able to return to their home nation. Do you understand? This is not like during the Baltic Wars in the 90s, where a bunch of refugees came to European nations, nearby, as well as other nations like Europe and Sweden and whatever. And once the war was over, they returned home. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these people coming and having to stay because they can't go back. Their place is no longer, habitable, at least not in the numbers of a population as it once was. So their nation may not even accept them back, because they're simply not going to be able to make the place habitable for such a large population once more. And that's the thing. You have to understand this. I'm sorry, but you have to drop this naive worldview that you seem to possess, where you think that simply just shaking your head and saying no, I don't want to, is in any fucking way going to change reality. No, I'm sorry, that's not going to help the situation. I very much sympathize with your precaution regarding immigration. I really, really do. But you have to understand, if people have nowhere to go, what do you want them to do? You want these people to fucking die in these nations? That's not humanitarian either, So they have to go somewhere. So yeah, if you really want to, prevent a huge, migration and refugee wave in the future, you better fucking start taking climate change seriously. These are just the facts. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. Simply telling your politician, we refuse to take in people, is not going to change the fact that these people are going to need to go somewhere. And eventually you are going to have to, take them in regardless, because they're going to fucking die otherwise. Do you really want that on your conscience? I don't think so. I don't want that on my conscience. And by the way, I know that when I say this, I sound like I'm moralizing. I'm perfectly aware that it sounds like that. But I fucking dare all of you. I dare any one of you who are listening right now. How am I wrong? If you have a problem with what I'm saying right now, don't just say, typical Cook, you're just moralizing. Dan Sandra, I didn't know that you were a fucking SJW, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, sure, it's not like I've made fucking numerous videos against the SJW crowd or something. But anyway, no, how am I wrong? If people are destitute and they are dying and they have to flee somewhere to survive, what do you expect them to do? And are you just going to let these people die? Again, I know how it sounds when I phrase the question like that. But how am I wrong? Anyway, let's move on.
This time, not about migrants fleeing war or poverty, but fleeing the harmful effects of man-made climate change.
Yes, and this time they're probably going to have to stay permanently. Again, with a war, the war will end at some point, and most of these people are going to be able to go back to their home nations. When you're dealing with climate change, if an area becomes inhabitable, no, they have nowhere to go back to. Again, this is not like a war situation. This is more serious.
So it sounds like the idea is that Ireland will be a kind of safe harbor of sorts for people living in parts of the world that will apparently become uninhabitable in the next few decades.
Well, at least take comfort in that your nation is not going to be alone, okay? Sadly, I hate to say this because, I mean, Sweden has already taken in a bunch of people already, and I honestly think we've done our part, but a lot of these people are definitely going to come to Sweden, you know. Norway is also going to have to take in people. Finland, the Netherlands, France, Germany, Italy and Greece and Spain. You know, all of these European nations, they're all going to have to take in people. We're all going to have to share that burden, you know, solidarically, and that's really the only way to deal with it. So even though I understand that once that day comes when these people start to, you know, migrate because they just cannot survive in their home nations anymore due to climate change, I understand the impulse that you say, oh, fuck them, you know, just lock down the border. But what's going to happen then is the nations who are actually willing to accept these people are going to have, you know, they're going to end up accepting too many because, I mean, we're talking about, the projections are that there's going to be like 100 million climate refugees in the future, something like that. All those 100 million people are not going to be able to, go to just a handful of nations, even if they may be large ones like Germany and France and whatever. Other nations are going to have to, you know, take in their share too. So whether you like it or not, you will be in a situation where these nations that have taken in a lot of these refugees may threaten Ireland, for instance, with not trading with them in the future unless they start taking in, you know, these refugees as well. So we can all in Europe share this burden, solidarily. And, you know, some of my subscribers listening to me right now, they know my history. They know that I don't like large-scale immigration, and I don't like the idea of, you know, honestly accepting any more refugees. I think we've taken our fair share, to be honest, and we're still trying to recover from just the sheer burden that our society took onto itself by supporting all of these people, most of which still have not gotten into any jobs or whatever. Some of them haven't even learned the language yet. They haven't integrated. We're going to have to reap consequences of the migration wave in late 2015, early 2016, for, you know, another decade at least, I would say. And a lot of my subs know that I've voiced my opinion on this before, and so they might actually be a little bit surprised that I'm saying what I'm saying right now. But again, that's simply just me accepting reality. You know, due to climate change, if it goes unchecked, Europe is going to have to take in even more migrants into the future. That's just how it is. We might as well fucking, you know, just accept it. But you know, Dave, there is a way we can avoid this, and that is if we take climate change seriously.
As to how a relatively small economy like Ireland's is expected to be able to support all of these people coming into the country.
Well, it's not just going to be you, though. Let's not be hyperbolic here, okay? Everyone knows that Ireland doesn't have the capacity to accept that many fucking migrants into the future. Again, the solution is that all European nations share the burden, if you will, and we accept solidarity. But not just Europe, though. People in North America, okay, Australia, New Zealand, all of the Western world is going to have to take their fair share, okay? That's just how it is. We're going to have to share this burden solidarily. Then we can actually manage. Then you're going to notice that, think about it. you have, what is it? You have like 50 Western nations in the world that would be capable of, accepting these refugees to some degree. If we're talking like 100 million climate refugees in the future, again, this is, however, also spread out over decades. So don't think it's going to be like one huge sum, like 100 million people all at once. It's going to be spread out over like 30 years or something. But if you share that, divide that on average with the amount of Western nations that could accept. I mean, we're talking like each nation over 30 years accepting about 2 to 3 million people, maybe on average. Okay, then I'm not taking into consideration, the size of the nation and what they can actually, take in. Of course, a nation like Germany may actually be able to, over 30 years, take in like, 10 million people, while Sweden over 30 years may only be able to take in 2. But the point is, when you actually crunch the numbers, you realize that it's not going to be as fucking bad as it might sound in the beginning. Again, we're talking about a 100 million people, which is a lot, but you do have 30 to 50 Western nations that could accept these people in the future, and we're talking about them being spread out over like 30 years. So it's going to be a challenge, yes, but if we share the burden solidarically, okay, we can do it, and we can do it well, and it's not really going to be too much of a bother, even if we're really smart about this. But again, we could simply avoid this completely if we took climate change seriously, but you don't want to do that. So, hey, you made your bed. You're going to have to lay it in the future. I'm just saying, okay? We could avoid the situation pretty much completely, but you didn't want to take it seriously, so what can I say, dude? If you get your way, that's the future we're going to have. Now, if I get my way, where we actually, deal with climate change in a smart manner, we're not going to deal with 100 million climate refugees in the future. We're probably only going to deal with, 30 maybe. So I don't know, what do you prefer, 30 million or 100 million? I know which one I would prefer, and that's the one that we would have. That's the number we would have if I was in charge, but I don't know, there's just too many people like you out there, and I think it's scary how the so-called skeptic community has accepted charlatans like you. It's really scary how this so-called community went from debunking nonsense like the wage gap myth, as well as rape culture and other SJW fucking nonsense, to just accepting pseudoscience like, racial IQ differences being, primarily genetic, or climate change is a fucking hoax, or how people even saying dumb shit like vaccines cause autism, how these people are all of a sudden starting to be accepted into the so-called skeptic community. Yeah, great job, Sargon, great job. Yeah, I just think it's scary how that's happened.
I just don't know. But just look at the title of this documentary. It's borderline apocalyptic. Will Ireland survive 2050? Is this...
I haven't seen the documentary, and I have no interest in seeing it. But let me just make this clear. If the point of the documentary is to paint a picture where climate change is going to be an apocalypse, then yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Dave here. Yeah, shocking, I know. But I'm going to have to agree with Dave that is ridiculous. I've said this before in all of my responses to Sargon and Dave before, as well as in my response to AOC. I've made it pretty clear that climate change, although it is very serious and we need to deal with it, and if we don't, we are gonna, reap horrible consequences for, hundreds of years at least. Although it's gonna be a very dire situation, it's not gonna be an apocalypse. Okay, it's not gonna it's not gonna kill off humanity. Okay, nor is it gonna lead to a bunch of coastal towns in the next 100 years just, becoming like fucking aquariums because we are taken over by the sea. Okay, that's not going to happen in 100 years, okay? So yeah, climate change, it's going to be serious. It's going to be a true test for us as a species. It's not going to kill us off, though. It's not going to be an apocalypse. It's going to be a slow, catastrophe that's gonna be incredibly fucking expensive for all the world's nations to deal with. And it is gonna kill hundreds of millions of people over a certain time span. But it's not gonna be an apocalypse. So yeah, if that's the message they're trying to send with this documentary, then, you know, if that's actually the case, then yeah, I think that's dumb. I think that's really dumb. Again, though, just like I've said before, it should go without saying, but I still feel the need to say this. Just because you have people like AOC or Al Gore or whatever who exaggerate climate change, it doesn't mean that climate change is not a problem. To argue that is to engage in a logical fallacy. Okay? It's called ad absurdum.
It's a serious suggestion that if we do nothing, that Ireland won't survive the next 30 years? Bearing in mind, every scaremongering prediction that's been made about the climate over the past few decades has been proven wrong.
No, that's simply not true. That's simply not true. I'm sick and tired of all of these claims that, oh, but, you know, in the 70s they predicted, you know, global cooling, but that never happened. Okay, so here's the story when it comes to the whole global cooling thing, for instance. I just want to bring this up here. I may make a longer video on this topic, but just to break it down, this is the true story regarding that so-called scientific prediction. So here's the facts. Between 1970 and 1976, only 6 papers that were published discussed global cooling. 7 more than those papers, okay, so 7 times more, the papers discussed global warming. So yes, for every single paper between 1970 and 1979 that in any way discussed the seriousness of global cooling, there were 7 papers. 7 papers more that discussed global warming. Okay? So let me just make this clear. Already in the 70s, the vast majority of scientists, 7 times more than the proponents of the opposite, 7 times more, the scientists argued in favor of global warming. Okay? So even back in the 70s, the global consensus of climatologists was that the world was getting warmer, not cooler. Now, the idea of a global cooling really started with Time magazine. That's where this idea got popularized in the media. And ever since Time started publishing this hypothesis of global cooling, it spread in the media and it survived even to this day, especially in the corners of the internet where climate denial is very rampant. But this is mainly something that survives due to the media sensationalism, not because there's any real serious scientist that's actually promoting the global cooling hypothesis. So yeah, in 24th of June 1974, Time magazine printed this article about the hypothesis of global cooling. Where they claimed that the Earth has been cooling since 1940, which, if you simply look at this graph, you will realize is simply not true. Ice and snow coverage suddenly increased in 1971. Again, that's not really backed up either. Dust and other particles may be blocking more sunlight. Again, this is not really expanded upon in the article. Newsweek also in the 70s published this article about the so-called cooling world, where they claim stuff like a drop in food output could start in the next 10 years, the Earth's temperature seems to be cooling down, meteorologists disagree on the cause and extent of the cooling trend, a drop of 0.5 Fahrenheit in ground temperature in the Northern Hemisphere since 1945, again, which simply lack any real backing. So yeah, this is a classic example. I know that Computing Forever didn't bring this up in particular, but this is one of those classic examples which climate denialists bring up as an argument about how scientists supposedly have always predicted, these climate phenomena, and they've always been proven wrong with time. And this pretty much just shows that that's simply not true. So no, not every single prediction that climatologists have made regarding how the Earth's climate will change with time has been proven wrong. That's simply not right. That's simply not true, Dave. And I honestly think it's sad that people buy this sort of thing. I think it's sad that people buy into this shit. You know, it's really pathetic, to be honest. And yeah, I think it's especially sad because, as many of you know, if you haven't figured it out by my username, I actually work as a chemistry teacher. I work part-time as a chemistry teacher. I teach people science. And I'm also, studying at the same time chemistry at the university. So I am both teaching science at a high school level as well as reading chemistry at the university level. But yeah, I mean, science is a passion project of mine. I think it's just fascinating to learn about how the world works, and the point of science is to be able to make predictions. Climatology would not be considered a science if it couldn't make predictions. But since climatologists usually are correct with their predictions, surprisingly so even, it is a science. And if this claim of Dave was true, that every single prediction by climatologists have been disproven over time, then climatologists would quickly lose their funding because they just wouldn't produce results. Unlike what these people like Dave seem to think, getting grants for your research, unless you can actually just, show politicians or any company that, it's going to be worthwhile, their investment, it's very hard to get funding for research. Like people don't realize this. It's not like scientists, and especially not climatologists. Climatologists actually find it quite difficult in many cases to find enough funding for their research. But it's not like a scientist can simply just reach out their hand to the government and get a huge fucking check written to them to do their research. No, you have to write a considerable amount of letters asking for grants to government institutes, or you may also have to, and in many cases this is what scientists do. You may also, try and get hired by a private company in their scientific division, and they will fund your research. But then you have to constantly show them why it is in their best interest, in their economic interest, to keep giving you money for your research. As a scientist, you have to constantly prove that your research is financially worthwhile, okay? So it's not like scientists are on the teat of the government or of companies. It's very, very hard actually to get enough grants or research funding to, do your research. But yeah, let's continue.
Going to get further into the science that debunks man-made climate change in a moment, and how it's basically just an excuse to introduce massive carbon taxes and fines. Now, just like with the climate strike protests that happened around the world recently, in which school children were front and centre of those protests, similarly here in Ireland, school children have also featured prominently in media coverage of the topic of climate change.
Making their message heard loud and clear and taking it to the seats of power, 157 young people aged between 10 and 17 filled every seat in the Dáil today to discuss how to tackle climate change.
So this entire fiasco just goes to show how low the establishment and the media have stooped to in order to push the climate change agenda. They can't convince enough adults to be this animated and passionate about climate change, so they have to use children. 10 to 17-year-olds? Is this...
It's a youth assembly. That's the point, you fucking moron. God, my God, you're just... Either you're a fucking moron, okay, or you're just incredibly fucking dishonest. Now, honestly, considering my experience with your videos so far, I'm starting to suspect it's the latter, to be honest. Although I don't think you're very bright either. But no, it's a youth assembly. The whole point is to invite these youths to discuss political matters. And as much as I hate the fact that climate change has become a political issue, or politicized rather. I mean, in a way, it's always been a political issue because you require political reforms to deal with climate change. That's just the reality of it. But as much as I hate the fact that it's become like this politicized issue where it's a left versus right issue, as much as I dislike that happening, I'm not to blame for that. People like you are. Yes, people like you, Dave. People on the right who keep denying it because it's inconvenient to you. Okay? You are the ones who have made this into a political issue. You are the ones who set up the false dichotomy that you have to be left-wing, or at least in the center, to accept climate change. You have set up the false dichotomy that you either have to be right-wing or accept climate change. No, you don't have to be left-wing or in the center to accept climate change. You just have to not be a smug douchebag who thinks you know better than actual trained professionals in the field. Okay?
Is how our democracy is going to run now? We refer to children to show us how to run the future of our society?
They made 10 recommendations, including a labelling and pricing system reflecting the impact a food product has on the climate, dedication of 10% of agricultural land to forestry, and a nationwide educational campaign.
Did you hear that, folks? The government...
Honestly, that doesn't sound too bad. I mean, these are pretty sensible reforms. You know, this is what you would expect a government to do. Yeah, you know, making the planet more green is a good way of dealing with carbon dioxide in the air. You know, because we have lost a lot of old forests to be transformed into grasslands for cattle, for instance, or just to be turned into urban areas. So if you restore the ecology of certain areas, that will be a net benefit for the planet. You know, that will be good for our atmosphere. And yeah, you know, you should educate people on how to at least partially remedy some of the problems. I really don't see the problem here. It all seems very sensible to me. It's also a good learning moment for these kids to understand how the political system works. I don't know. I really don't see why you find this to be some kind of atrocity being committed.
Government is going to take advice from school children between the ages of 10 to 17.
These people cannot vote, Dave. They're not old enough to vote. You don't have to worry about them enacting their will, okay? It's not like these people cast a ballot and you know, the majority of them is going to win a fucking election. These people cannot vote. They're too young. However, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a voice. I mean, what kind of a fucking fucked up standard is that? Oh, don't listen to anyone who's below the age of voting, you know, because they're always just going to have, you know, fucking stupid ideas because they're not experienced. Yeah, I personally am against lowering the voting age to 16 or whatever, which is what he's going to bring up later. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to young people. You know, they do deserve to be heard, and this is a great opportunity for them, without voting, to still be heard. And I think that's perfectly fair. You know, I think the government should take into consideration what these young people are saying. I mean, they will inherit this planet when you and I are gone. Don't you think their opinion matters? Just saying.
I'm sure they're not just parroting things they learned in school or anything. Why didn't we ever think of asking children to help us solve society's problems before? I mean, here I was thinking that we had to actually elect adult politicians to be our public representatives, but it turns out that we can just refer to children who can't actually stand for public office because they're too young. I mean...
Nothing that they come up with here in the youth assembly is in any way legally on par with what you do when you vote for a politician. These are just suggestions, Dave. Calm the fuck down.
If they can make recommendations about climate change, maybe they can help us make recommendations.
Yes, recommendations, not obligations. These politicians can easily just ignore these kids as well. And if you were in the parliament, you could ignore these kids. You could even argue against the points they're making. No one's stopping you. But I guess you're too fucking lazy to actually run yourself, I guess. I don't know.
Recommendations about all sorts of things. I mean, what's next? Could infants teach us something as well? Maybe the next Minister of Finance will draw the national budget in crayon.
You do know that when companies develop diapers that are supposed to be comfortable for babies, you know, because a problem with the older generation of diapers is that they were actually really uncomfortable for babies to wear. And no one really, understood that because babies, they can't really talk, okay? So unless it's like uncomfortable to the degree where a baby will actually start crying when it wears the diaper, as long as the diaper is just, somewhat uncomfortable for a baby, parents wouldn't notice that a diaper was actually uncomfortable for their baby. So what these companies do these days, that make diapers for babies, is that they actually do studies where they see what babies think of the diapers that they actually develop. It pays off, both in terms of the market as well as the political system. So I guess, how does anyone take you seriously? I really don't know.
It reminds me of a Michael Scott joke.
If a baby were president, there would be no taxes, there would be no war, there would be no government, and things could get terrible. It would be a better screenplay idea than a serious suggestion.
Tell the taxpayer how Ireland could have to pay millions in fines for not reaching sustainability targets.
As Justin Barrett has recently said, the carbon taxes will be used to pay the carbon fines.
Ask the mothers and the fathers, do they want their child to grow up in a broken world that they helped create? This campaign would elicit an emotional response.
Yes, an emotional response, not a rational response, an emotional one. Feels over facts, heart over head.
Dave, you are such a fucking hypocrite. Like, goddamn, you're just such a fucking hypocrite. It's unreal. So your point here essentially is that, they want to use an emotional appeal, so therefore, their point is invalid. No, that's not how it works. It is true that an appeal to an emotion, okay, it is true that it's a logical fallacy in most cases. However, it's not always wrong to engage in an appeal to emotion. If you have a genuine problem, okay, and you really want to deliver home the point of how important it is to do something about it, an emotional appeal is a good way to make sure that people really absorb the message. Okay? Think about it. Starvation is a problem even to this day in many parts of the world. But would you really be motivated to actually donate to a charity to help with starving children in Africa or whatever? Would you really be motivated to do that unless you saw the images of people with fucking pot bellies because they haven't eaten anything in a month? No, like it or not, emotional appeals, they work to some degree. And it's not wrong to employ them sometimes, just to really bring home the point. Now, if you rely on them solely, that's a problem. But that's not what's going on here. It's not like these people are relying only on emotional appeals to the public. No, they rely on the facts too, and I'm sorry, dude. The facts are not on your side. If they were, okay, you wouldn't engage this video attacking these fucking kids who honestly are not relevant to the fucking point of your video in the first place. You would actually, attack the scientists. If you really had the facts on your side, you wouldn't make a video like this. You would make a video debunking Potholer 54, for instance. Okay? You would make a video debunking Thunderfoot. But you don't. Because you ain't got shit.
Propose a tiered tax based on emission bans from large-scale corporations decided after consultation with the Climate Advisory Council, with higher tax rates at each band. The tax rate will then go up each year, while that threshold for the higher tax rate goes down each year, meaning more and more emissions are taxed at a higher rate, and those companies that refuse to go green will pay more and more.
More and more. That's ultimately what this is all about.
Yes, but motherfucker, you don't have to pay anything. You are unaffected because you are not one of these companies. Unless you have something to tell us. Do you have a fucking chimney in your fucking backyard where you burn coal? Because unless you have a coal power plant in your fucking backyard, okay? Unless that's the case, no, you're not going to be fucking affected by this. So how about you stop fucking whining on behalf of the fucking corporations who honestly give no shit about you? They don't care about you. They don't care about you, Dave. They care about their profit. And trust me, they're making a huge fucking profit. Simply taxing them a little bit more is not going to change that. And it's not going to affect you. So why the fuck do you keep sucking the dick of these big fucking corporations who honestly don't even fucking know you exist in the first place? Why? Why? Is it because you have this principle, according to yourself, you care about the free market? Pfft. We all know that you don't actually care about the free market. You only care about the free market when it works in favor of your already established worldview, okay? Because, when bad things happen to people you don't like, all of a sudden, you don't believe in market forces anymore, okay? as a supposed ANCAP, you supposedly believe that the government should stay out of the business of YouTube. Okay? But apparently not, because you think that there's a conspiracy to silence, conservatives on YouTube, which, by the way, is not really true. Hunter Avalone made a couple of good videos, actually. I don't actually like the guy, but he actually made some pretty good videos. I have to give him some credit, where he debunked the myth that conservatives or right-wingers in general are silenced on YouTube and on Google. That's really not true, it turns out. But no, I mean, you argue for the free market all the time, unless we're talking about YouTube, because apparently all of a sudden when YouTube, in your view, attack your side, then all of a sudden, the talk about a free market no longer applies. No, then all of a sudden, it's a free company. They can do whatever they want. All of a sudden, that's not valid anymore. Then all of a sudden, you want the government to actually get involved, which is very fucking hypocritical. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that your supposed principles that you use as a justification for these points, you don't actually believe in them when it comes to situations where when it comes to certain situations.
About more and more taxation. Children are highly impressionable and will believe practically anything you tell them. And if they've been given no reason to believe that climate change is a scam, they're not going to question it. So children can be one meme.
No. Children are impressionable, yes. But honestly, so you seem to be as well. I mean, fuck. The way you argue about stuff is very fucking childish. And also, I have to call into question your sense of standards here, because I genuinely believe that if these kids did the opposite, if they argued that, climate change is a hoax, you all of a sudden would not have a problem with this. I really believe that's the case. Now, I can't run a simulation and prove my thesis, of course, but knowing your character from the videos I've responded to, as well as all the videos I've watched of yours that I haven't actually responded to, it's pretty clear that a lot of the standards that you're supposed to have, you don't actually have. And if these kids, had parents that pushed them into saying stuff like, climate change is a hoax, I know for a fact that you all of a sudden would not have a problem with it, because that's just the kind of fucking douchebag you are.
Means by which the establishment can push an agenda on the populace. In this case, massive austerity through carbon emission fines and taxes. It's the same strategy being employed in the UK.
Again, these taxes do not affect you. And also, let me just add this. I'm actually not a huge fan of the way that carbon taxes are being done. I think carbon taxes in of themselves are a good idea, but you actually have to use that money, that tax revenue, to invest in new infrastructure that's going to be compatible with renewable energy. Even nuclear energy is better than fossil fuels. But that's not really what's done. I think in a lot of cases where you've engaged in carbon taxes, the money that you get as a revenue hasn't actually been invested back into the system to, develop green technology or an infrastructure that's compatible with a green technology. And that's a problem. It's really a problem. So I understand the frustration that Dave has with carbon taxes, but I don't disagree with them in of themselves. I think they're actually necessary and a good thing. It's just how they've been dealt with that's a little bit of a problem. But that's not true for all nations, of course. There are some nations where they have carbon taxes, but they actually invest that money wisely. But yeah, that's just how it is. Carbon taxes on their own don't really accomplish much, in my opinion. But the revenue you get from carbon taxes, if you spend them wisely, then yeah, it goes a long way, and it's good.
Or in the US. Now, the journal.ie had an article in October, and it was a poll: should the voting age be lowered to 16? Wales and Scotland have made this change. Should we? In recent months, younger people have become increasingly more influential on issues like the climate emergency. So should they also have a say at the ballot box? The results of the poll thankfully showed that sanity still prevails, as 71% of people said no, obviously understanding that children have a very immature and simplistic view of how the world actually works, and they have very little life experience, so they can't exactly make wise and well-informed decisions, and therefore should not be able to vote. That should go without saying. The reason why the left in the UK have pushed the idea of lowering the voting age is because they're aware that young people are more left-leaning, generally speaking, and much more likely to vote for left-wing parties and policies. If you ask young people, for example, if they want free education and free healthcare, they're very likely to say yes.
Oh my God, how horrible. The end times are near. These people want to have a true meritocracy where people are actually, where people's success in life actually depends on their actual output and their actual efforts instead of, subjective characteristics that are pretty much luck-based, such as whether you get sick in your life or if you happen to be born into a rich family or not. These people want to take those equations away from the playing field. These people want everyone, regardless whether they're rich or poor, to be able to get a proper education so they can get a good job. These people want everyone, despite their economic background, to be able to get a fucking, appendectomy in case their appendix bursts, so they don't have to fucking, end up in debt, which may ruin their chances at a better life. These people want all of that? Oh my God, what monsters. Yes, because, clearly being in favor of this, which would actually, promote an actual meritocracy. I mean, that's obviously an immoral, position. That's obviously horrible. That's going to lead to the fucking, brimstone and sulfur, hell on earth situation. That's, my God, I feel you. I feel you, Dave. Yes, wanting free education, or, universal education rather, and universal healthcare. I mean, yeah, no, totally unreasonable. Totally unreasonable. Yes, I mean, it's not like you have argued for a meritocracy or something, I mean, come on. Yeah, oh my God, this is so dumb.
Because they don't realize that there's no such thing as free. Someone has...
Yes. Yes, thank you, Captain Obvious. Of course, universal healthcare and universal education is not actually free. It's going to be paid with tax money. Just like roads are, which you drive on and walk on and whatever, In fact, the very same roads that, enable private companies to utilize them so they can, transport goods and whatever. Without roads, all of society would fucking collapse, you ungrateful fuck. Or, the clean water that you drink. The same fucking tax money also goes to making sure that the food you eat is safe. So you don't get botulism, like in medieval days. But yeah, no, thank you for that clarification. I'm sure no one figured that one out. But I mean, people just told me free education, and I legitimately thought it was free. No, but thank you so much for clarifying that. That we definitely feel like we've all learned something today. The more you know.
To pay for it, the taxpayer. And young people aren't taxpayers yet, so it's easy for them to be benevolent with other people's money. But when they become adults, enter the workforce, start paying rent or a mortgage, they realize how fleeced we all are by taxes. When you're a kid, you have nothing, so you have nothing to lose. But when you become an adult and begin acquiring wealth for yourself, resources, and property of your own, the last thing you want is the government telling you that they're going to transfer your wealth to someone else in the form of taxation. The left want to continue to keep the people dependent on the state, so children are likely to vote for policies that support a big government, because...
Is that why, in a lot of Western nations, the so-called left-wing parties have actually privatized a lot of areas that used to be nationalized? Is that the case, Dave? Because, I mean, to me, that just doesn't really seem compatible with what you're saying at all. It almost seems like a lot of left-wing parties in the world have actually gone right. But, oh, silly me. I mean, who cares about actual policies being, passed in parliaments across the world or whatever? It's not like, actions speak louder than words or anything. Yeah, silly me.
They're not yet independent themselves. They're used to being dependent on someone else, their parents, the public school system, etc. Anyway, we'll move on. Recently, Natural News published the following article. Climate change hoax collapses as new science finds human activity has virtually zero impact on global temperatures. They make reference to a paper published in June of this year. Finnish scientists spearheaded the research, releasing a paper entitled No Experimental Evidence for the Significant Anthropogenic Climate Change. The paper explains that IPCC analysis of global temperatures suffers from a glaring error, namely failure to account for influences of low cloud cover and how it impacts global temperatures. Natural variations in low cloud cover, which are strongly influenced by cosmic radiation's ability to penetrate Earth's atmosphere due to variations in the strength of our planet's magnetosphere, account for nearly all changes in global temperature, the researchers explain. As this chart reveals, more cloud cover is inversely related to temperature. In other words, clouds shield the surface of the Earth from the sun, providing shade cover cooling, while a lack of clouds results in more warming. This is further supported by researchers at Kobe University in Japan, who published a nearly simultaneous paper that reveals how changes in our planet's magnetic field govern the intensity of solar radiation that reaches the lower atmosphere, causing cloud formation that alters global temperatures. In effect, cosmic rays, which are normally deflected via the magnetosphere, are in times of weak or changing magnetic fields emanating from Earth itself, able to penetrate further into Earth's atmosphere, causing the formation of low-level clouds, which cover the land in a kind of umbrella effect that shades the land from the sun, allowing cooling to take place. But a lack of clouds makes the surface hotter, as would be expected. This natural phenomenon is now documented to be the primary driver of global temperatures and climate, not human activity. The extreme alarmism of climate change lunatics, best personified by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's insistence that humanity will be destroyed in 12 years if we don't stop burning fossil fuels, is all based on nothing but fear-mongering, media propaganda and fake science. The IPCC and NOAA both routinely fudge temperature data to try to create a warm trend where none exists. It's all a massive coordinated fraud, and the mainstream media deliberately lies to the public about climate change to push anti-free market schemes that would destroy the US economy while transferring literally trillions of dollars into the pockets of wealthy globalists as part of a carbon tax scheme.
Now, before I go on to these two papers, before I explain why what he just said is complete and utter bunk, let me just add that I think it's so funny how the very same people like Dave, who argue that the free market is supreme and it's so wonderful because it's so, adaptable and whatever, in the very same breath honestly argue that, all of these, carbon taxes and reforms would completely destroy the market and everyone would, experience a huge economic downturn and a huge economic collapse. Those two are not compatible, okay? I mean, which one is it? Either you will have to praise the market for being so adaptable and wonderful. I mean, that's the main thing that you guys usually argue when you argue against, socialism or some other, spooky fucking boogeyman. But that's simply not compatible, okay? You can argue that, or you can argue that, climate change and the reforms that are necessary to deal with it is completely going to demolish the economic system. Now, the latter one is very dumb. It's a very dumb thing to believe, to be honest. But I would at least respect you if that's what you truly believed. But that's simply not compatible with what you guys usually say, that the market is so incredibly successful because it is so adaptable. Okay, so let me get this straight. The capitalist market, okay, it's so fucking adaptable. It's so fucking good when it comes to everything else that we've had to adapt to, in the last 200 years or something. We have prospered because of capitalism, the free market, whatever. But you mean to tell me that some carbon taxes, some simple reforms to promote green energy, that is what's going to kill the free market? Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here with this fucking weak-ass sauce. You're fucking pathetic, you know that? This is so goddamn stupid. Of course this is not going to fucking reduce the free market to rubbles. I mean, what that tells me is if you genuinely believe that, it doesn't seem like you're very confident in the free market, to be honest. Yeah, this is really dumb. Okay, let's go to the two papers that are referenced. Alright, so when I looked at these two papers on my own, I found a couple of things that I took issue with, and that really puts into question their validity. And if we look at the first paper that's referenced by Computing Forever, there is one major red flag. However, a friend of mine who is an actual physicist also found even more things that I missed that is very problematic regarding these two papers. But if we look at the first paper, we will find that the citation that they use is erroneous, which means that this paper has not been peer-reviewed, because you wouldn't pass peer review if you did not use the proper way of referencing something in your paper. In fact, the site where this paper was hosted, Arxiv, does not peer review any papers. If we look at reference 2, 3, 4, and 6 of this paper, This author simply cites himself. And not only that, but the sixth reference is to be published. Yikes. Generally speaking, this paper is talking about obstacles faced by climate research that existed maybe 30 years ago, but not today. It's endlessly referencing itself, and none of the papers that are referenced have been peer-reviewed. None of the claims in this paper can be substantiated in any way. Now, if we look at the second paper, it's awkward. The whole subject of the paper is regarding a phenomena that is supposed to happen millennia apart. The paper talks about how parts of the lower atmosphere are subject to greater galactic exposure during the course of a geomagnetic reversal, and how this can drive sudden climate events. This is nonetheless a very fascinating topic. However, here's the problem. We are not in the middle of such a reversal that is described in this paper, meaning that this entire paper is simply not applicable to current day climate change because we are not experiencing the phenomena that is described in the paper. It's irrelevant. But hey, I'm not surprised, you know? Computing Forever is, quite honestly, a moron. Let's be honest. Let's call him what he is. He's a moron. And the fact that he posts, one, a paper which is not even peer-reviewed, and two, another paper which honestly is not relevant to current-day climate change at all, shows that he just doesn't understand what the fuck he's doing. Or he's just that fucking dishonest, I guess. Take your pick. But I guess at the very least, I get a chance to bitch slap someone else on the internet, for your amusement.
And also, as Paul Joseph Watson recently pointed out in one of his videos on the Extinction Rebellion,
it's almost as if all the investment firms, NGOs and billionaire elitists fear-mongering about climate change are the same people who stand to make gargantuan, jaw-dropping profits off of climate change because they own and are all invested in the carbon trading mechanisms that deal with carbon offsets. The combination of global warming and growing environmental consciousness is creating a potentially huge market in the trading of pollution emission credits. BlackRock Capital with the Climate Finance Partnership, HSBC, JP Morgan Chase and Citi, all part of the Blended Finance Action Task Force, and they state there are, quote, profits to be had in, quote, climate-related sectors. Rothschild Australia and E3 International launching the Carbon Ring Consortium. 23 multinational corporations at the G8 Climate Change Roundtable, including Ford, Toyota, British Airways, BP and Unilever, who all called for these carbon trading systems to be established right at the beginning. Rothschild, HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, BP, Ford. Wow, it just sounds so grassroots, doesn't it?
in addition, there's some very important research conducted by some Irish scientists.
You know, it's almost as if they want to make money or something. I mean, what's the problem, Paul? What's the problem, Dave? Are you not in favor of capitalism? Companies making money from a changing market? Look, these companies seem to know the truth. They seem to know that, hey, climate change is actually happening. So let's get on top of this, okay? If we can make money from new technology and whatnot that's going to be developed for, you know, green technology, for renewable energy, why not start now? You know, let's make money. Let's make money. That's what's going on. Why is it that when it comes to this, you all of a sudden have a problem with the free market? With companies, you know, thinking ahead just so they can make a lot of money in the future. Now, all of a sudden, it's a problem. But when oil companies like Shell buy patents for electric cars and put those patents on the shelf just so they can artificially elongate the lifetime of the dominance of fossil fuel-driven cars on the market, then all of a sudden you don't have a problem with it.
The Connolly Scientific Research Group, and I'll include a link to their website, globalwarmingsolved.com. This is from their website. We carried out new laboratory experiments and analysed the data from millions of weather balloons to calculate exactly how much global warming carbon dioxide was causing. When we did this, we discovered that the answer was 0.
Oh, really now? Oh, really now? Okay. Okay. Now, I've done this before, I know. But I just love this little clip because it's so good. It's so fucking good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a little clip of a simple fucking experiment that anyone can do at home, which indisputably proves that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and if you pump too much of that shit into the atmosphere, it's gonna warm up. Here you go.
Carbon dioxide is one of the gases that absorbs Earth's heat, or thermal radiation. In this experiment, we will show carbon dioxide absorbing thermal radiation, and so mimic the greenhouse effect. So what is the greenhouse effect? Well, let's begin with the Earth, its atmosphere, and the Sun. The Sun emits energy out into space, called solar energy. When the solar energy reaches Earth, two things happen. Some solar energy is reflected by the top of clouds, ice sheets, and other shiny surfaces, but most of the solar energy passes through the Earth's atmosphere and heats up the surface of the Earth. As the Earth warms up, it releases heat up into the atmosphere. This heat is called thermal radiation. Some of this thermal radiation escapes out of the atmosphere and goes into space. However, there are certain gases in the atmosphere called greenhouse gases, which absorb and trap the Earth's heat inside the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases, or GHGs, are primarily water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone. This keeps the surface of the Earth warm. In fact, if we didn't have the atmosphere, the Earth's average temperature would be closer to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, as opposed to its current average temperature of around 57 degrees Fahrenheit. So the greenhouse effect is a vital process that sustains life as we know it on the Earth. We're going to need three things to do this experiment. Firstly, we're going to need a source of thermal radiation, and we can use a candle. You can feel the thermal radiation, or heat, when you hold your hand next to the flame of a candle. So secondly, what we need is a sensor that can detect thermal radiation. What we will use is an electronic device called a thermopile. You can see that we built a little copper chamber around the thermopile. There's a thin film of plastic at the end of the sensor, which is just to stop the gas blowing into the candle. We're going to introduce different gases into this space and see how the gas changes the thermal radiation from the candle that reaches the thermopile. The third thing that we need is carbon dioxide gas. We will make this by mixing baking soda and vinegar.
Okay, let's try this. Here we have the green balloon with air in it. We're going to open this first valve, then we'll open the valve to the chamber, and as expected, nothing happens. The line stays steady. And now here we have the red balloon, that's the one with the CO2 in it. So we'll open the valve to the balloon, open the valve to the chamber, and again, as we expected, the line goes down because the carbon dioxide is absorbing some of the thermal radiation from the candle. What this experiment shows is that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and contributes to keeping the surface of the Earth warm by absorbing thermal radiation. Therefore, if we introduce larger quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we expect the atmosphere to warm and cause global climate change.
It's sad to say that an enormous amount of people have bought into the man-made climate change narrative. It's so pervasive and reinforced by lots of media outlets that it's hard for some people to believe that it could just be a gigantic lie.
Yes. Every single climatologist in the world, no, fuck that. Most scientists, the overwhelming majority of scientists in the world, are all in on one grand conspiracy to keep the truth hidden. For what purpose exactly? I don't get it. I don't get it. Like, what's the motive? Why would scientists, why would the vast majority of scientists across the world, why would they partake in a huge conspiracy lying about climate change? Why? No one can explain that to me. No one can explain that to me. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Yeah, I'm gonna try and make more videos in the future. There's been a little bit of a gap in between videos. I've been busy. I'm studying 2 courses at the same time right now, and of course, as you know, I'm also a part-time teacher, so yeah, I have that to think about as well. But yeah, I do my best, and if you guys enjoy my content, then perhaps I can ask you to donate on my Patreon. You know, I would really appreciate it, and if I get enough donations, you know, if I reach about $100 per video, that alone would make a big difference for my economic situation. It really would. It really would. Thank you guys for supporting me, and thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the future. Bye.